All right. Hey, welcome back to the Give and Go Basketball Podcast with Ben Sperry and Ryan Steele. Again, if you are listening and like what we have to say, please subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. We do have a Twitter page. Make sure we follow that. And we are going to be jumping to other streaming services soon, like Spotify, Amazon Music. But anyway, so this segment, I mentioned in our last one with the draft that we have a group text between us, and we're constantly just shooting ideas back and forth and stuff. And one idea that keeps coming up in this thing is just players who are either overhyped or just underrated. And there's one name, and I think we can all agree on this because I am a huge fan of this player. And Ben, actually, I'm gonna just let Ben talk about this because I think Ben Sperry is the president of this guy's fan club. So Ben, go ahead and take it and just say the idea behind this.
Yeah, so the idea is basically to figure out who are the players, not just currently, but historically, that are underrated in the sense of they've never been all-stars, but are legitimately great basketball players. And the name for this that I'm going to throw out there is CJ McCollum. And I say CJ McCollum because he had a hot start to this season, but he's been a great, really elite offensive player in the NBA for a number of years now. Sometimes gets lost in the shuffle because he plays second fiddle to Dame Lillard, who obviously is one of the best, 3 or 4 guards in the entire NBA. Absolutely. But CJ McCollum literally started this season on a tear. He did get hurt and he's missed a few games, but he was playing out of his mind for the first 13, 14 games of the season or whatever it was that he played. And he's done this before, whether in the playoffs or just big moments. He is one of the most elite offensive players and complete ISO scorer, can play off the pick and roll, can play in spot up and in space, and can create for others. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what I call a CJ McCollum All-Star team. We're going to pick players, both Steele and I together. We're going to try to create a good All-Star team. The only criteria is they never played or were selected to play in an NBA All-Star game.
Right. So I just want to reiterify this. This is not a draft. We're not going to do it that style this week. But these guys are just going to go ahead and rattle off their picks just for the best guys, again, that just, aren't really, ever mentioned on an All-Star caliber list. So, Ben, go ahead back and let me know who you got, because I'm excited for this. I just want to know. I don't know any of these names, so I'm excited for this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Steele I'll just work kind of together on this one. But if you look, as you go back and look historically, I think it's actually easier to find guards that kind of fit this criteria. Would you agree?
So we were talking kind of earlier today, and I was like, is it this obvious? Am I missing guys that now? I kind of made a judgment call on because I was originally doing a starting 5. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had, point guard through center, and I was working it out that way. And I kind of went with personal preference on some guys that were close, some guys that I just like more. Yeah. But guards, especially point guards, seem to be a little easier to find than like traditional centers. At least in my findings. I don't know what you thought.
Well, yeah. So let's start here. Just among current players. I mean, CJ McCollum's obviously the name of the team, but Mike Conley,
I left him off because it was obvious.
Right. But I would say the next one that immediately came to mind for me is Mike Conley.
Mike Conley Jr., yes.
He's a guy.
Starting point guard.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's been one of the better point guards, but never maybe enough of the best point guard to be on an all-star team. In fact, he's one of the highest paid players in the league at one point because he's
for a few years,
instrumental to team success. And he continues to be very, very good for the Jazz.
I think an issue that comes up with him is, especially all-star teams, it's voted for one end of the floor more than the other. Now, we've seen guys get in like Draymond over the years who, are more defensive-minded players clearly. But I think his slight is people don't value enough of his defense, how good of a ball stopper he is on point guards in a point guard-driven league. So I think that gets overlooked for all-star voters. But Mike Conley to me is the number 1 point guard on the all snub list, basically.
Yeah. Who else do you have from today's game?
My second one, and I like this guy more because I grew up watching him, but Mike Bibby was on that list.
Arizona, right?
Yes, sir. Arizona
There we go.
Wildcat. He broke our heart in '97, dude. In Final Four,
yep.
Carolina.
Bingo.
But Mike Bibby, I loved his whole game from wearing Jordan 12 lows as a king, and it just, to me, he was so awesome like as a player. And he did get overshadowed because you played on a team with Peja, who was lights out, and C Webb, who was obviously a top 5 power forward at the time. But if you looked at his stats and Conley's stats, offensively at least, they're really comparable. And Bibby's top tier years were slightly better offensively than.
And shout out to those early 2000 Kings, right?
Some of me and you, some of our favorite teams of all time.
Some of the best teams that never won a championship.
Yes.
And
Keon
Bibby,
Clark, where you at?
and Bibby was actually, in a lot of ways, the closer for that team, especially in the playoffs. It wasn't as much C-Webb. I mean, Peja could really shoot, but Bibby
had to get it. He had to get it somewhere else. Exactly.
Right. And running that high screen and roll, especially against the Lakers where Shaq didn't step out. Bibby just hit shot after shot after shot.
Yep. So, I mean, is there any – okay, like this. We can go through position-wise, 1 through 5, but are there any other point guards that you would put on that Michael Bibby Conley tier?
Actually, yes. And I think this guy is definitely up there. Rod Strickland from the 90s.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Rod Strickland was actually an all-NBA player without making an all-star game.
Right on.
So to me, he has to be on there.
Bullets, or who was that with?
I believe it was the Bullets. He led the NBA in assists that year.
Right.
Like maybe 97, 98, somewhere in there.
It might have been earlier, honestly.
And it could have been. I don't have it pulled up, but he was a legitimately really good point guard for a bunch of teams too, and never got selected for an all-star game. So that would be my other point guard that I throw out.
So yeah, we'll do almost like a gold, silver, and bronze. Those are the top 3. Moving on to shooting guards. This was another good one, and I know I almost 100% know, other than CJ, who your number 1 guy is, and I'm gonna tell you my number 1 guy first. I have your guy second, I believe. I went Jamal Crawford. Jamal Crawford is one of my personal favorite players of all time. To me, outside of Kyrie and Steph, I think his handle might be better. Like, his handle is crazy, shot making ridiculous. Think of some of the great teams he's been on towards the end of his career. We talk about closers. He was the closer for teams that had all-stars on it. You know what I mean? Like,
future Hall of Famers.
Future Hall of Fame guys. And they were like, yo, Jamal, get in here and finish this game off. Top of the key, shake and bake. I mean, that was his
incredible ISO scorer. Another guy that's kind of like that in today's game is Lou Williams. They call these guys just professional scorers.
Yes,
they just come in. Now, Jay Crossover or Jamal Crawford, he had more. You're right. In terms of just the smoothness of his hand.
He had the boom bat. He's so bad. He's so bad. Can I tell you who I think your number 1 guy at shooting guard is?
Oh, you already know, but go ahead. Yeah, I love Jason Terry. So he's a guy, and a lot of guys, and again, similar mold, like guys that win 6th man of the year, scoring off the bench. But Jason Terry's another great example of a true
closer.
Their
own.
And he's a true closer. I mean, even years like, obviously.
Don't bring that up, though.
Well, we did it against the Heat, but I mean, even the year that they went to the finals and lost to the Heat, I mean, he was a starter, I think, at that point. But he was an unbelievable shooter, scorer. And did it in hot stretches, and in the fourth quarter tended to be his hot stretch. Dirk Nowitzki's the greatest player on the team, but
where when the ball found him and you're playing against him, if you're a fan rooting against him, you were just sick to your stomach. You just knew he's gonna make this shot. You just felt like he never missed for stretches of games. And there's not too many players that I think of that aren't all-stars that kind of carry that that bag with him.
And something that goes along with dudes like this, like the Jamal Crawfords, Jason Terrys, et cetera, is they play with a certain level of confidence.
Irrational confidence.
I think that's what Bill Simmons calls them. And it's a great phrase, but you almost need that to be great, right? Okay, I'm not LeBron, but you know what, LeBron? You can't guard me. I'm going to hit this 3 on you down the stretch.
Now, I think it's key to have that, but when you're Mario Chalmers, I love you, Mario Chalmers, but that irrational confidence would keep me up at night. So that's a little shout out.
I'm going to interject for a minute here and just say that it's funny to me because, in Steele, you and I have had these conversations before many of times, is that each and every one of these guys that you guys are mentioning are the glue guy to a team. Those guys that you can always count on.
Oh, 100%.
It's not about them. They're going, and we talk again, and I'm going to mention this about 1,000 times in this podcast. Is Steele and I are huge North Carolina fans, so most of our conversations are
you
about
a Carolina
that.
Fan?
Oh yeah. Can you tell? But we talk about this all the time, and like the Theo Pinsons, just anybody and everybody at North Carolina we talk about. But anyways, so it's funny to me that these guys are just those guys that are always in the right places at the right moments. Now, their stats might not be LeBron James, Michael Jordan types caliber, right, all-star caliber, but they're just always in the right place at the right time, doing the right things at the right time. So, all right, back to you guys. I just had to interject.
No, but you're right. That's a great point because like the unselfishness of a guy like Jason Terry, who played on terrible Hawks teams and could have just continued playing for bad teams and getting numbers and making all-star games. But instead, he stayed on a great team and was like, yeah, I'll come off the bench. Yeah, I'll be the third, fourth option. But when you need me, I'll be the number one guy to go to. And even Jamal Crawford, like we said, he was coming off the bench for those Clippers teams and some other great teams where they're asking him to be the guy at the end, but he doesn't start. It just takes a lot of unselfishness to be like, okay, I'll be there in the end when you need me. I don't need to start. And it's a message that a lot of young kids should get today too.
And we're going to have to move on to another position, but you could load this position to me, like the combo guards, shooting guards. There's just so many. Because even guys like JJ Redick never made an all-star game. Amazing shooter.
Yes.
He had like a 2 or 3 year run there where you definitely were like,
yeah. I mean, you go back in time, Ron Harper averaged 20 a couple times in the 80s, and he never made an all-star game. And even as an older player, was a very good defender. You got guys like Derek Harper, who was a legitimately really, really good player for the Mavericks back in the day. There's lots of guards that I think fit this profile.
I just couldn't find a year where I thought Derek Harper deserved to make an all-star team over the people that, what I'm saying?
That's fair.
That was my only thing with Derek Harper was. So we go to the wing position, to the small forward. I had one clear one that I thought was Richard Jefferson.
He was very good for a stretch of the 2000s.
Right, especially almost immediately into the league was like kind of like his best spurt there. Now, you're going to be great when you play with like Peyton Manning of basketball when Jason Kidd is throwing you dimes, obviously. But just what he gave you from 3 levels of scoring, to be able to knock down a corner 3, to pull up and hit a pull-up jumper, and obviously he was great at attacking the rim and dunking in transition. Wasn't the greatest ball handler, I'd say. That was probably his one thing that he lacked, but I thought he was awesome in those early 2000s there.
One guy I thought of when we were doing this as like a wing that would fit in here is Jalen Rose, who is pretty darn good for the Pacers at one point.
I was going to say, was the Pacers, I would take his
he came in the league as a point guard, an oversized point guard for the Nuggets, but he didn't really take off there. He was really good.
It was his first year with the Pacers. I think it was a few years into the Pacers, right?
It was like right around the turn of the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, because I think he might have been on one of the Pacers teams that lost the Bulls in 7. But he became more and more of a factor as, like, I think Chris Mullin was there briefly and he got old, and then Reggie started, getting a little bit older. They started going to Jalen Rose more as an ISO, like, big guy that could create some shots for both him and others.
And a secondary ball handler to Mark Jackson in some of those teams.
Yes, and he was very, very good, I thought, for a period of 2 or 3 years there.
Agreed.
Putting up numbers for the Pacers.
So, Richard Jefferson, Jalen Rose, I really didn't have anybody else at that small forward that I thought.
So this one's hard because I don't know whether to call him a small or power forward, and it would be different in today's game. But Tony Kukoc in the 90s was a big favorite of mine.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, though, it's tough to say what year he would have made it, because at his best was what was it his rookie year when he came in when Jordan wasn't there?
Yeah, and he came in, and I think he came in a little older because he came.
Well, he played overseas, right.
Yeah, but no, he was very good, and then he was 6th man of the year in '96. Yes, but he was a guy that was a closer on that team. And he was
memorably,
a really good
Scotty freaked out in the playoff game because they wanted Kukoc, shoot the shot in the playoffs.
Right, and also he was kind of before his time. If he played now, he'd be a stretch four and shoot threes the whole time.
Yeah,
and his elite playmaking ability would come out more too.
Boy, would he be a liability on defense? Woo.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. One last shout out that I think fits this mold is Cedric Maxwell, who was an NBA Finals MVP.
Yeah, can't leave him
in an
off.
All-Star game. So
he's probably the number. It could be the Cedric Maxwell All-Stars, honestly, if we wanted to be fair. Okay, power forwards now. I had two that were standouts to me, and they are kind of more recent. I got Lamar Odom.
Yes, definitely. That's who's going to be now number one.
Because this is where
he's a better version of Kukoc, right? Like he can rebound and play defense a little bit better. Yeah.
Because this is where I get into a numbers and talent thing, like in unselfishness. His talent was 20, 10, and 5.
Oh, yeah. He could have been.
But because the teams he starred on didn't need 20, 10, and 5, he was more, 14, 8, and 3. But talent-wise, he's one of the best power forwards to me that never made it. He's awesome. He was fucking great.
Yeah, no, he was so good in his prime. The Lakers teams that he helped win, 2 or 3 championships. No, I guess it was 2. Late in Kobe's career was awesome. Who else was I thinking of for power forward? I had
just looking at Lamar Odom's stats here. I pulled him up. He was almost, for his career, he almost averaged a double-double. He was at 13 points and just about 8.5 rebounds for a career. For a guy like that,
And like we said about other guys on this list, I mean, he could have stayed on bad teams and, like I said, had 22, 12, and 8 or something. He could have had years like that, but instead he played on a small dynasty, basically, that went to some championships and won. So I give him a lot of respect for that. And I thought, if guys like Draymond or Kyle Korver can make an all-star game for being on a great team, he's kind of a guy that you sacrifice and should have been on an all-star team. Ben, the other guy had power forward was Josh Smith.
Oh, okay. See, I wouldn't have thought of him, but that's a good one.
Yeah, because I was like, because I was thinking of this kind of era, that 2000s era. Yeah. And I was like, I feel like we forget about Josh Smith because of what older in his career Josh Smith became. Almost a joke. Yeah. Dude, shoot another 3. We're going to let you shoot as many of those as you want. But prime time, like that 5-year stretch.
He's incredibly athletic. Yeah.
I mean, just what he did defensively, what he did in transition.
Low-key was a good passer. Yeah, he could do some stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Like he could do some stuff. So that was the only guy I had below Lamar for power forward.
So I have an older one that I was thinking of, Sam Perkins. And it's actually interesting as we go through this. There's a lot of lefties are way overrepresented on this for some reason. And I don't know if there's something to that, but
Perkins.
Yeah, Sam Perkins was he was kind of like before his time in the sense that he could shoot threes and step out a little bit. Had great length, so he's a decent, on defense.
And
where did he go to school?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just so we have this, make this clear. Where did he go to? Oh yeah, that's right. All right, North Carolina.
Yeah, Benny, that was the only center I really found that I thought could have in some of those years. He just unfortunately came up in an era where the center was the best player on most teams.
Yeah. Very true.
But even guys like Arvydas, who we love.
Right. That's who I was going to move to for centers. I was going to say Arvydas has to be one of the top.
It's just tough because you look and it's like as great at skill he was. If he would have came over 8 years prior, I'm sure he would have made all-star teams. By the time he came over, he's in his mid-30s already or early
he was
30s.
Up there, and he'd already gone through some knee issues and stuff.
Yeah.
So he was kind of immobile. But I will say, look at his stats from his first year over. He averaged 16, 10, and 3. Yeah. And again, another guy, he could shoot a little bit from the outside. So but they didn't really shoot that many threes then, especially centers. I think he was still really good when he came over. So we're seeing what he could have looked like with his son.
Yeah.
Who is an all-star. And his son's putting up incredible stats for the Pacers, kind of under the radar. We're talking like 20 and 12 and 5 or 6 assists. And
he's their best player.
Arvydas could have been that, maybe even better. We don't know. Just because he didn't come over till too late.
So that kind of wrapped up my guys. Do you have any others that you thought were?
In terms of centers, Serge Ibaka is a current guy that, I
Yes.
mean,
That's
maybe
fair.
he's never
Yeah.
all-star good, but he is defensive player of the year type good for a while,
Mhm.
blocked a lot of shots. Actually has become maybe more valuable than his stats would suggest because he can step out and shoot so well as play good
And
defense.
still defend. That's a big
Yeah.
thing for right now.
So, you know,
100%.
he's one for me that I think I would
To
give
me, he's a
shout-out.
valuable guy that you want on a championship team.
Right.
When we talk about all-stars,
Yeah.
though, to me, that game doesn't translate. Just being a defender at a stretch four, basically, is what he's become.
But defense is a very important part of the game, and I had to double check. Dikembe did make All-Star games because he was going to be my number one for this, but then he did make All-Star games. So I found trying to find his equivalent, and Marcus Camby was the closest I could think of.
Ooh, yes.
Who was really, really good for a number of years for several teams, but he was never an all-star. He was just a guy who gave you a double-double and a bunch of blocks.
Yeah, 12 and 8 and blocks some shots.
Yeah.
A great player, but in his own right, but to me, not an all-star.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to say, boom, there we go. You have it. The best
CJ McCollum All-Stars.
The best
CJ
CJ
All-Stars.
McCollum All-Stars. And CJ, if you're listening and you ever want to be a guest on the show, hey, we got you. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break.
Lehigh, and you beat Duke in the tournament. So thank you forever. I made fun of my friend for years off that. I appreciate you, CJ. Thank you.
Go Tar Heels. All right, this is the Give and Go Basketball Podcast. Stick around. Thanks. Hi, this is Mitch Shreve with the Give and Go Basketball Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for all the latest updates on all of our postings and content. You can also email us at thegiveandgo3@gmail.com to ask us any questions or give us suggestions on what you'd like to hear about all things basketball. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.